Hi, I'm Angela Ryder. Thanks for joining me today. And today I want to talk about the void. Last week I talked about gateways and portals, and that led me to want to share about how I perceive and work with the void and how it might help you too. So, the void gets described a lot of ways, from mystical and spiritual to some very unhelpful and disempowering concepts. So, what I want to offer today is kind of like my own take on it and what I've come to understand it as through the years of experience and practice. And hopefully that gives you a useful perspective and ways to work with it if you find yourself there. Or at a minimum, it can help you reorient yourself so you feel supported instead of free falling into nothingness. You can feel held. Let me start with what I mean when I say the void, because the word does carry a lot of different associations. Mostly in spiritual and metaphysical traditions across many cultures, the void isn't nothingness in the way we might generically think of that word. It's more like the space before form, the undifferentiated potential from which everything can emerge. So, the source of creation. Some traditions call it emptiness or formlessness, origin of all things. So, that's kind of how I perceive it too. So, with that, what I experience and perceive the void is as a quiet, spacious presence that's more like I'm being suspended in potential. It feels kind of velvety dark and rich and nourishing, is the best way I can describe it when I'm expanding my consciousness into that space. And in this dimensional place, the usual signals and structures seem to go quiet until something more foundational becomes available. So, like if you find yourself in a time of life where you're in the void, it's like the cosmic kitchen before the orders come in. It's that held space of ingredients and potential before the next thing actually appears. The void is also where the Akashic pool lives, all the potential, all the data, all the information, where your higher self interfaces with that deeper data of your soul path, and where integration happens below that level of your conscious perception. And your spirit team is still working in there. The silence on the surface doesn't mean nothing is happening underneath. So you can also intentionally access the void. So there's another way to encounter the void beyond finding yourself in a quiet life period, and that's when you intentionally visit it. So the void as a dimensional space that you can expand your awareness and consciousness to connect into. So this is different than the kind of experience from the in-between quietness of a void time that life kind of carries you into. It's more of an intentional interface, access through your expanded awareness, rather than how you arrive there through a circumstance of like quietness in your life. So when I access the void this way, it has that same velvety, dark, rich quality of potential, but it's kind of like where the Akashic pool is, where the higher self-consciousness interfaces and where the spirit team operates. So you're expanding your consciousness, not to go and retrieve anything from it, so much as expanding your awareness to meet it and receive from it. Think of it as consciously entering the cosmic kitchen rather than waking yourself and finding yourself already in it. So the practices I've talked about in other videos, where your hand on your heart, you open and ask your team for support, you expand your awareness to receive, these are all ways of intentionally accessing this space. The void isn't only something that happens to you. It's also someplace where you can go if you want to receive more deeply. And how this might show up as a lived experience kind of looks like this. Just because you know all of this about the void doesn't make it necessarily comfortable to be in a lifetime of life where the in-between quiet spaces. The void as a lived experience can feel disorienting, especially if you're used to getting a lot of easy access guidance from your team. So it can feel directionless, like the synchronicities have dried up and the guidance is quiet, and signs have stopped appearing. So it can feel like somehow you've lost your connection or are doing something wrong or, fallen off your path. And it also can look like depression from the outside or feel like that from the inside without actually being that. It can feel like a suspension or a floating in something dark without landmarks. Kind of like the dark, kind of like when you close your eyes, you're just with yourself space. And it's like waiting for something that hasn't arrived yet. So you're kind of floating in this dark space where you can feel like nothing's happening. And some people experience it as that quiet period between one version of themselves and the next, where something has been released or you're in the process of dissolving it, and the new version of you or the next thing for you hasn't fully arrived. It's like a cocoon phase or an incubator where something's happening that you can't see from inside. So if you're in a period that feels like that right now, like you're kind of in between, you're not getting a lot of guidance, you feel kind of alone in there, it doesn't mean that you're failing your spiritual practice or that you've lost your connection or the guidance has abandoned you. It just might mean that you're in that void space, and the void is actually doing something. It's like you're in the cosmic soup. So I did want to make also a distinction between kind of the void versus checking out. So the distinction here between mental and emotional well-being, spiritual bypassing, and that quiet transition experience of going through the void, I want to talk about that. Because feeling empty, hollow, or disconnected due to emotional or psychological reasons deserves your care. Grief and depression and burnout and trauma responses can create like a felt sense of absence or nothing. And we want to tend to our emotional and psychological well-being and not use it, the premise of a void, as a spiritual bypass. Like, oh, I must be in the void, when we actually need to tend to some inner work. So there's also a version of like, I'm in the void that functions as a permission to float around through life waiting for something to arrive, using the spiritual language of being in the void as like a cover story for what you're avoiding. And really, that's what I call drift. And drift tends to feel kind of flat and numb. And there's like a background of awareness that you're circling something that you need, that needs attention, but you just haven't willing to turn inward and look at it and take action. So the void has presence in it, even in its stillness. It's like there's a suspension in something and you're not like floating away from everything. So there's usually a feeling of like you're being held and cooking, even when it's kind of uncomfortable or unfamiliar, and you can't name what's holding you. You just feel like something is working on your behalf and you're being held through it, even though you don't know where it's going. So if you feel like you're in transition or uncomfortable in the I don't know yetness of things, just ask yourself, does this stillness feel like being held in something, or like it's the absence of something, like you actually need to do something else? And that could be, do I need self-care, or am I drifting and avoiding? And you can also check in as like, do I feel like I'm in a spiritual incubator and still cooking? It might be a mixture of all, but it's good to kind of take yourself through those questions. And now I just want to share a simplified version of how I tend to recognize when I'm in the void of my own experience. And I'm just sharing this so it might give you a way to help you find your own version of it. So over the years of practice and paying attention, I've learned that inner quiet of the void tends to mirror and match the external quietness. There are fewer obvious signs that I'm getting and less loud guidance, and more of a sense of like just like an inner knowing and navigating, like, that feels right, and then just allowing myself to trust it. But in that void space, underneath that quiet, I always feel something else, like something is happening even though I can't see it. And it's like, I catch a waft of it, like something's cooking in the cosmic kitchen. So that sense of being held or incubated, even when I don't know what's being prepared within me or for me, is kind of how I see myself when I'm in the void. And now that I know what that feels like, I learned that it's okay not to know the outcome. The not knowing in the void isn't the same as being lost. It's more like knowing that I'm in the in-between and learning to trust that in the in-between has a purpose even when I can't perceive the outcome yet. So that's what I'd like you to invite you to pay attention to like, not like, do I feel empty? But ask, does the quietness feel like something's happening underneath it? Because if it does, that's probably the void doing its work. Like, you can hear the rustling in the kitchen. Your work is to trust the process, allow things to cook, and try not to put all your energy into trying to figure it all out. So, what does guidance look like when you're in a quiet period and you're not getting the usual signs and signals? The guidance is still there. It's always going to be there. But when you're in this void time, it tends to express differently. Again, there'll be less clear directional signals and synchronicities, and it becomes a time to tune inward to more of a felt sense of inner knowing that doesn't necessarily have any obvious external confirmation. You kind of have to go by that inner feeling. And you get less in the way of messages, but somehow you still feel supported, and you can begin to trust the process. And the practice I always come back to in those quiet periods is the same foundational one I always teach: hand on heart, ask for support, be open to receive it. In the void, like, the receiving might feel different. It might feel like stillness and rest instead of clear information and direction. And you can trust that that's enough. Sometimes that's exactly what you need. So, the void does give you a little bit of a permission slip to slow your roll. And when you're in the void, the practice isn't try to figure your way out of it. It's to trust that you're in it for a reason, that your team is working in the background, and that the integration is happening just below your perception. And most of all, remember that you can still make choices from your inner knowing without external signals confirming them. That inner guidance interface is always there, and you can tune into that part of you that knows the next small step, even when you're in the dark of the void. And here's a few things that might help. This is a time to stop scanning and constantly looking for the next synchronicity or sign, because just doing that, constantly scanning, can create distractive noise and a hyper alertness that doesn't need to be there. The quiet of the void is information in itself. It's the cue that the void is here, that you are in this space. It's the signal that you're in between or in transition and integrating. So trust that if something is meant to get your attention, it'll find a way to let you know. So stay with the small inner directed steps, and you don't need a big sign to take a next step. You just need to connect with that inner knowing, however quiet it is right now. Again, always ask your spirit team to support you, and notice what might feel different and what can feel like the smallest, most natural movement forward or pause. That's enough. And you can always ask to be held in support rather than led. In a quiet period, sometimes the most useful thing to ask for isn't like, show me the way, show me the sign, but help me trust that I'm okay while I wait to see it. And your team is with you in the void. You're not alone. I find it helpful to think of it as I'm putting requests into the cosmic kitchen, and I trust that the team is busy cooking and helping things along. So let your time in the void complete itself. The void isn't permanent. Things emerge from it. You emerge from it, like in differently directed and different from when you went in, which is kind of the point. So to wrap it up, the quiet of the void is not a failure of your spiritual practice, and it's not evidence that your connection is broken or that you've been abandoned by your guides. It's a multidimensional space of potential, a place where you can visit, or a place where you find yourself and the next version of you and your path is being prepared, and where your spirit team is working in ways that you may not be able to perceive yet. And it's where that inner guidance, inner navigation gets to become like your primary source of guidance or compass rather than your backup. So you are guided and held in the void, even if it doesn't feel like it. You can trust yourself in it, and you can trust to take small steps, even in the dark, without signs. And you are always held. And if you'd like support in a quiet period or want help distinguishing between the void and something that needs more active attention, we can look at that in a session, and the link is in the description. I'd love to hear about your experiences of the void, whether you visit there or you find yourself in the void or have been, and what did it feel like, what helped, and what is your perspective. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.